Before we proceed, and I want to share a couple of things with you. We are in our college. We are recruiting very heavily. We are recruiting 13 faculty this year in all departments. So I get to see 13 times 5, about 65 faculty candidates go to the building. Invariably, I meet with them or our dean. I think it's appropriate I share two stories with you that just last week, since we're talking about employment. The first one, we had a candidate in finance, and he walked in and sat, and he probably didn't know where he was. He had no idea. I don't think he had ever been to our website. It came through loud and clear during our conversation. There was no energy of any kind about the institution that you were going to ask for a job. Lesson to you that do your homework. People who interview you, whether it's in industry or in academia, they can sense that very quickly. What kind of excitement that you show about their organization. So it's really, really key that you make sure you understand what that college or the organization is all about. The second one, I interviewed a faculty in marketing very recently, a very great resume, an advanced rookie at the assistant level, but advanced assistant level. And he came in with a pair of jeans, a shirt not tucked, and he had a blazer and tennis shoes. Now, personally, I don't care. I mean, it doesn't matter to me, what they wear as long as they deliver. In a perfect world, it shouldn't matter. It's all about, whether you can do the job or not. But we're not in a perfect world. These things become very important. They signal how serious you are about the organization, about the job you're seeking. These are two very small things that I noticed last week can be instructive to all of us in terms of how when we go out and seek jobs. You work 5 years on your dissertation, you work 2 years on your master's program. I think it's extremely vital that you put in some time as you go to interviews. With that, let me introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker, Dr. Brian Tomlin. Dr. Tomlin is on the faculty at Tuck School of Dartmouth. Prior to his academic career, he worked in the US and Europe for GE and Boston Consulting. Brian received his PhD from MIT Sloan School of Management and his undergraduate degree from the University College Dublin, Ireland. He serves as an associate editor for Management Science, MSOM, and he's a board member of the Production Operations Management Society College of Supply Chain Management. Brian has extensive experience both in industry and academia. So it's very nice to have him to give his insights and perspective as to what the candidates ought to be doing in the market this year. Brian?
I'm going to try and use this mic. It sounds like it's working. People can hear me okay? Okay, great. Thank you. So first of all, thanks very much for the invitation to speak today. It struck me on the flight down last night that it was Informs 10 years ago when I was actually on the job market interviewing for jobs, and time goes very fast. When I was in the job market, it was my very first time at Informs. I'd never been at Informs before, didn't know what to expect. I was coming down to look for a job. So I think part of my goal today is to sort of demystify in some sense what the academic job market sort of process is like. I will be giving this somewhat from a business school perspective and not so much an IE perspective. There are many similarities, I think, between sort of job searches in OR IE and sort of business schools, but there's probably some differences in emphasis around teaching versus sort of grants. And so I will be sort of giving you a business school perspective on things, so please take it under consideration with some of my comments. A quick show of hands. Who here is sort of on the job market sort of this year? Pretty much okay, so at this point I'm not going to sort of talk about applications and things like that. I'll sort of take it as from informs forward. But the first thing I want to say about the academic job market is that what's the objective of the school? So the school's objective, we're trying to figure out who's going to be a great researcher, who's going to be very good in the classroom, and who's going to be a good colleague that you're going to sort of spend time with. And that's a fairly hard thing to judge, even if you spend a lot of time with candidates. The reality is we don't get that much time with candidates. 30-minute interview with informs, a day visit at the school, and we're trying to sort of make long-term projections on people's potential. It is a very inexact science. And I realize you might not want to hear that. You might want to think it's very, very controlled and people able to judge people very, very well. It's not that. We do our best, we take it seriously, but we're forming impressions. And your job, in some sense, is to leave us with good first impressions. And there are certain things you can control in the job market process and certain things you cannot. What you can control in many ways are the impressions you leave in your interviews, in the talk and informs at the school visit. So I want to talk in some sense about informs and then some school visits. And think about, I should say, chime in with questions at any point in time, by the way, feel free to chime in with questions. So if we think about informs, there's the faculty, interview the faculty, and then there's the job talk, for want of a better word, at informs. So if you think about the faculty interviews, first of all, I can't emphasize enough exactly the things that Bala had said there. If I think back over the past 10 years of interviewing candidates, what sort of jumps out at me? It's when a candidate is either unprepared or seems unenthusiastic. Being unprepared can be asking questions that, so let's imagine I'm interviewing at Tuck. At Tuck we don't have an undergraduate program. I'd expect someone to know that before they actually come and have an interview. If someone asks me about teaching the undergraduate program, that straight away tells me they haven't gone to the website to learn about the school. So doing your homework, knowing about the school, and then I'm amazed at times that I can almost guarantee every interview, at some point you'll be asked, and do you have any questions for me? And not saying it's often, but it's more often than it should be, the candidate will say, no, I have no questions for you. And I'm always stunned. I'm like, wow, how would you not have a pre-prepared question? Even if you don't want the answer, you've got to make it look like you're interested in hearing what I have to say about the school or something. So always have some canned question you're going to ask. I don't know if you ask the same question to everybody, because I'm only there for that one interview. So you make sure you have some pretty thought out questions. The interviews are very predictable in terms of what you're going to be asked. You're going to be asked about your research. Tell me about your research. What have you been working on? What are you going to work on in the future? And I almost guarantee every single interview that from the academic side, you're going to get asked that question. So you should have your answers ready for that. And you can rehearse those things. You want to come across as it's energetic and enthusiastic, but you can practice, in some sense, what your 1 minute, 5 minute, 10 minute descriptions of your research are going to be. You'll also be asked about teaching, in the sense, well, what do you want to teach? What things could you teach? And so there's some fairly predictable questions. What I'm looking for in an interview is trying to get a sense, is this person, do they have initiative? Are they self-starter? Are they kind of people that come and sort of work hard, be able to generate research, be good in the classroom? And the energy and enthusiasm is a good proxy for whether I think someone's going to have initiative and be a self-starter. I am struck quite often by people's degree, in some senses, of passiveness in the interview. It's not that I don't think they want the job, but for whatever reason, they're not sort of coming across as enthusiastic, energetic as you might expect someone to be. And this is particularly true in business schools, in the sense we're trying to imagine, is this person going to stand up in front of MBA students? If not in the first year, at least at some point in the first few years of their career, and are they going to be able to, in some sense, own the classroom? And, having a degree of confidence, being able to speak, being able to ask questions, are things we're sort of looking for during the interview process. The And there's sort of don'ts that I've heard at times. So a few years ago now, we were saying to a candidate, I'm going to go to your talk on Tuesday. I'm looking forward to it. And the candidate said, oh, no, don't go to my Tuesday talk. My Tuesday talk's not the good talk. My good talk's on the Monday. It's like, well, Tuesday's when I have time to go. I'm busy, I've lots of talks to go to. It's a Tuesday talk I'm going to. And I was just amazed that you're coming to go on the job market. If you're going to give more than one talk, that's fine. Every talk you're going to give is going to be a good talk. And you can't tell people, no, my good one's on Monday and my not so good one's on Tuesday. So it's these things which sound so silly in retrospect, but in the moment you're nervous, you're not necessarily sort of thinking things through, and always be cognizant of how you're coming across when you're sort of answering these questions. But it's very good. It's half an hour, very predictable. So it's very a surprising question in that sort of interview at Informs. Then there's the actual sort of giving a presentation at Informs. And the good news is this is a very controlled environment. You're not going to get a chance again to give a talk in a controlled environment, especially when you start teaching. It's very, very different. So it's roughly 20 minutes. There's not much scope for questions during an Informs presentation. Typically, I'm not saying it's unheard of, but more often than not, there's not anyone interrupting you in the middle of your Informs talk, asking you questions. There might be maybe one or two questions at the end, but typically not sort of during it. And faculty are going to come and they're going to be looking at your talk. And the reality is, I think I speak for most people, I'll speak for me, though I suspect it's true of many other faculty. I'm not really judging your research in that 20-minute talk. Because 20 minutes isn't an awful lot of time to try and judge someone's research. I mean, I can read your papers, there are reference letters from advisors, things like that, which give a much better sense of someone's research potential. So, at a high level, what am I judging in the presentation is, roughly what kind of research is this person working on? Does it seem like an interesting problem? Certainly sort of try to judge that. What I'm really trying to judge is, can I imagine this person in the classroom? That's the main thing that I'm sort of looking at when I go to the actual presentation. And that's, is a presentation well structured? Are they motivating the problem well? Can they deliver a 20-minute presentation? And there's almost no excuse for not being prepared for an Informs presentation, in the sense that you can rehearse it. Oh, not scary of you. There's still time to rehearse. I mean, you practice, you rehearse, you do your presentation, and it is very stressful. I was freaked out and stressed when I was doing my job sort of talk presentation. But the good news is it's only 20 minutes, and it's something that you can control, and you have the ability to decide what you want to say, and you're unlikely to be interrupted with some strange questions during the actual presentation. And so that's what goes on at Informs for the most part. The other thing I should say now, in case I forget to say at the end, is as stressful maybe as a job sort of search is, and meeting people and being asked questions, it's tiring, it's exhausting, it is an amazing opportunity to meet your field. And I think of the people I met during the interview process, the professors I met when I was interviewing, I got to know those professors much, much better and much more quickly than the people I did not meet in interviews at that Informs conference. It's a great opportunity to sit down for half an hour and be able to tell people about your research, and how often again you're going to get a chance to have half an hour of senior faculty time to sort of sell yourself. So it's a great opportunity to meet your field. And unlike, I think, Val mentioned I worked for GE and Boston Consulting Group, the big difference, I think, in recruiting in academia, to my experience, is that when I was interviewing for consulting jobs, I was interviewing for industry jobs, I didn't meet the jobs I either didn't get or didn't take. I never met those people again. I interviewed with them, and my career went to one direction, I never saw them again. That's not going to be true in this career. The people you interview with, you're going to see again and again and again. And so these impressions are going to linger for a long time. And so it is something that you want to take pretty seriously in thinking it through. And then so after Informs, so what happens? The faculty go back And we sit down and we sort of share our impressions of the candidates. So, I saw this person, you saw this person, what did you think? And we're still trying to figure out, is this person likely to be great researcher, likely to be so great in the classroom? Are they the kind of person you want to spend time with on a day-to-day basis? And so this point we have more information, at least we've seen people present, we've interviewed people, and then you're trying to take there's many good candidates, and you're going to bring in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, depending on the school, but typically not bringing in 10 candidates for the most part. It's only sort of 4, 5, 6, or 7, I suppose. And that's a hard thing to try and figure out which 4 or 5 people to bring in. Different faculty might have different tastes and different sort of perspectives, but somehow we all get thrown in the mix and we decide who we're going to invite for school visits. When I was in the job market, school visits were all January, February, some even early March. Over the last 5 years, they've started shifting a little bit earlier, so it was unheard of when I was in the job market to have a school visit in December. That's not unheard of nowadays. I think it's still more typically it's January and February, but it's not unheard of for it to be a bit earlier. And so what goes on this visit to the school? Well, there's the interviews again, and then there's the actual typically hour and a half, in middle schools, job talk. So we talk about the job talk first of all, and then back to the interviews. So the job talk, when you're at the school, is a much less controlled environment than it is at Informs. In the sense that we're still trying to, an hour and a half, you have a much better sense of someone's research. So we're certainly trying to judge research. But that's maybe half, maybe less than half, I think, in some sense, of what's really being judged in the job talk. This is what we're really trying to think, can I imagine this person in front of students? And so it's how you respond to questions is arguably as important as anything else you do in the job talk. Obviously, there's a structured presentation, etc., but you're going to get questions that you maybe should or shouldn't anticipate, but really questions, and how you respond. Not just the answer, but the process by which you respond to questions becomes very important. And I'm guilty of something that most faculty don't like, and maybe it's a European thing, I don't know. But if someone asks me a question, and I know what the question is going to be, I think it's a great question, I signal my agreement with the question by almost finishing the question for them. This is a big no-no. I do it, you shouldn't do it. You want to let the person ask the question, let them finish. Even if you're agreeing, it's a really great question, it's such a great question, I know what you're going to ask, and I'm going to finish the question for you. Don't do that. Let them ask the question, and then how you respond becomes important. If it's a really hard question, I remember the senior faculty giving me advice once, have your bottle of water, and if it's a hard question, you can always walk over, and while you're thinking, you could look like you're just sort of getting a little bit of water because you're sort of thirsty. But the answering of questions is important, and you know what, there's times when a question you might not be able to answer. It's not ideal, but it's okay. I mean, we can't answer everything. And I've certainly been impressed at times when a candidate has followed up with me later and said, hey Brian, I didn't give a great answer to that question. I was thinking about it afterwards, and I followed up. Then I was thinking, okay, this is someone who's sort of thought professional, and they're thinking enough to sort of at least recognize they didn't answer the question very well in the moment, and then follow up. That's not very typical. I'm not saying most questions get answered sort of pretty well. Also, certainly in the middle school environment, trying to understand what kind of research you're doing, how well you can motivate us. Can you imagine sort of selling, I use the word selling in a good sense of the word, can you sort of sell your research to non-academics? Can you walk into an MBA classroom? Can you communicate ideas in a clear fashion? So it's also being judged doing the job talk. And the job talk is definitely tougher, I think, than the Informs 20-minute presentation. But at the end of the day, if you don't like standing up for an hour and a half talking, it's probably not the right career for you. In the sense that that's what your job is going to be a lot of times, standing up in front of students, talking, listening, answering questions. Teaching is not as stressful, obviously, as an hour and a half job talk. There's less riding on it. In terms of the interviews, very similar interviews at the school visit as there are Informs. I would say one thing is that most faculty, myself included, we're not trained to interview people. I think the interviews I got when I was in industry were much better structured interviews. They were trying to get at things in a much more structured fashion. We have half an hour, no one's trained us how to interview people, so we ask generic, obvious questions for the most part. So the same questions you're going to get asked in forms, you're going to get asked by faculty on the school. Tell me about your research. Tell me about your teaching. Do you have any questions for us? I mean, that's pretty much how it's going to sort of unfold. And again, you want to have questions prepared. It's absolutely fine to, and you should, ask the same question of multiple faculty. For a variety, some students say, well, I shouldn't do that because somehow the faculty will talk to each other and they'll find out that I'm asking them the same question. Well, first, we don't talk at that level of detail about the person asking this or that. And secondly, you should ask the same question because you want to get a sense of how consistent are the answers you're getting. If you're asking a question that's important to you in terms of is this going to be a good fit for me in the school, and you're getting wildly different answers from different faculty, that should tell you something about either the school or that there's different perspectives in the school, and that's important to know. So it's absolutely fine to ask the same question multiple times of different faculty. Again, the energy and enthusiasm and professionalism, you've got to somehow communicate that. If you don't seem passionate about your research, why am I going to care? So if you don't look excited, if you don't think it's the most important thing, I'm not going to think it's the most important thing. And this is hard, because if 2 or 3 years of working on your research projects, oftentimes, I'm bored sometimes by the time the paper is done. I've worked so hard, I'm bored by my paper. But you can't look bored by your paper when you're in the job market. You've got to look excited and talk about it. You have to have some idea of what I'm going to do in the next few years. I was a bit odd that I worked in industry after my PhD and then came back to academia. So I did not have a good answer to this question when I was asked, well, what's your research going to be on for the next few years? And I was like, supply chain management. Those are as precise as I could be, which is not precise enough. So you try to strike the balance of giving some sense of what kind of research you're going to do without being really specific. My next paper is going to be exactly on this. But it's giving some sense that, well, so I'm analytical modeling. So I'd say, well, typically, what I do is I do modeling work, I continue that in methodology, I work as within supply chain management, this sort of broad area within supply chain management is the kind of things I'm going to be working on. So you go to ask questions like that. The one interview which is different is the dean's office interview. Whether it be the academic dean or the actual dean, depends on the school, depends on their schedule. But almost always you will meet someone from the dean's office. They're not necessarily from an operations background. They might be, but they might also not be. So they're not there to try and evaluate your research. That's not what they're there for. That's not what they're able to do. But they're certainly able to evaluate, can I imagine this person in front of alumni? If not immediately, at least sometime in the future, can I imagine this person in the classroom? And so that degree of professionalism, looking them in the eye, shaking hands, and do the obvious things in a confident, professional manner. If you don't look confident in that interview, it can really hurt you. The dean's never going to be the person who says, you should hire this person. But they might have a view of, you should not hire this person. And so, in some sense, it's a defensive interview. What you don't want to do is leave that interview and left a bad impression with the dean's office. And so here, they have to talk about your research in a digestible fashion to someone who's not from an operations background. Tell me why managers should care about your research. Tell me about your research. So you're now sort of answering that question to a non-expert, non-operations expert sort of person. So how you answer that question, you think through a little bit more about that, so how you package your answer to that question. That's pretty much how the actual, pretty much how the process unfolds, and hopefully afterwards you get an offer and then sort of things unfold in sort of different manners. But I don't want to take any sort of Bruce's time. I think there's Q&A afterwards, so happy afterwards for any sort of Q&A and things like that. But that's basically the process. It's going to unfold over the next couple of months from the academics to the job search.
Well, thank you, Brian. We'll have time for Q&A afterwards, and I know there are a number of lawyers here. Feel free to chime in during our discussion. Our next speaker from the industry side is Dr. Bruce Patty. Dr. Patty is the Vice President of Transportation Analytics at Veritex Solutions. He has worked for, consulted for a number of major organizations, American Airlines, CSX Transportation, Conrail, Norfolk Southern, Delta Airlines, and Pacer Stack Train for over 20 years. Dr. Patty received his bachelor's degree from University of Arizona, a master's and PhD from Southern Methodist University, SMU in Dallas, not in Singapore, in Dallas. Dr. Patty is also on the board of directors of Informs and is published extensively in major journals. So with that, Dr. Patty.
I'm just buying some time. I'll use this mic. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. So what I want to talk a little bit about, following up on kind of Brian's theme, is the process of finding a job in industry. But I'm going to take it back one more step. So there's to me, there's kind of three steps in the industry side. First is, how do you find companies that are looking for people that do what you want to do? Then we'll talk a little bit about, once you find companies that need people that do what you want to do, how do you get an interview with them? And then the third stage, okay, now you've got an interview, how do you perform well, or what are they looking for during the interview process? So let's start with the first of those. Unlike academia, industry jobs there's not like a nice publication. They're not all listed in the back of the Informs or MS Today. They're not all listed on the various websites. You typically have to do more hunting for them. Only, and I don't know the exact statistics, but I would say that probably only about 20 to 30% of OR jobs in industry are done in what one would categorize as an OR group. I mean, you got to be a pretty big company to have a dedicated OR group, and that's all these people do, is like an internal consulting kind of thing. And I worked for one of those. I worked for American Airlines back in the 80s when we took a group from 45 people to 450. That was an internal OR group, but those are really rare. Typically what you have are OR people that are positioned within the company. Like, for example, you might have an OR person that's in a logistics management group that's helping do analyses on how to flow equipment across the country. You might have an OR person that's in a marketing group that's helping doing forecasting models for them to figure out what the demand's going to be like. So it's not an internal OR group, it's people that are positioned within different business units that are doing OR work. Well, so they're not going to post this ad in Informs because they probably don't even, the people that are recruiting may not even know about Informs because they aren't OR people. They don't have like an OR. So you got to figure out how do I find that 70 to 80% of positions out there that aren't in an OR group. Well, so there's a lot of ways you can do that. I think it's a lot easier now than it used to be. The whole social networking kinds of things provide you some tools that weren't out there years ago. So you can, LinkedIn is extremely powerful in industry. If you're not in LinkedIn, you need to get in LinkedIn. And use that to find out where are people, for example, if you're coming out of school, where are people that came out of the same program that you're coming out of, but in previous years, where are they working? I mean, those people found jobs someplace, hopefully, Where are they? What are they doing? You know, and that'll give you some ways to find out. You know, you can use the Informs directory, the online searchable directory to find out, well, where are people that came from my school, or you know, where are these kinds of people finding jobs? They'll give you some tips. Now, I'm not saying that don't use the stuff that's in the back of the ORMS today or the online stuff. I'm talking about that there's a whole bunch of stuff on top of that you need to be tapping into on the network side. You need to be talking to your faculty members to find out where people that you know, that used to study for them, where are they working? You've got to do that kind of thing because there's a much broader base out there. You need to look at journal articles, but typically like application-oriented journal articles for, say, like things in interfaces or people that are being nominated for Edelman Prizes or things like that, to find out people that are doing industry, you know, good, interesting work that's being performed in industry. So let's say you do all this work and you find a bunch of companies that look like they're hiring OR people. You know, you find the companies that are doing OR work, and then you maybe go to their websites, and most companies have websites now where they're posting what jobs they're hiring for. And you see that, oh wow, they're looking for someone. It may not say, you know, OR specialist. It may say logistics analyst, or it may say forecasting, or it may say something like that. You know, and so you have to kind of key into those keywords that are out there. You find those things, and so now you're ready to send them your resume and your cover letter. So let's talk a little bit about you know, what you should be sending them that's going to entice them. You know, you found the opportunity. Now you want to kind of, your goal in this next stage is to get them to bring you in for an interview. You know, they're not going to hire you from your cover letter or your resume. They're going to bring you in for an interview. So what are they looking for, and what's going to turn them on, and what's going to turn them off? The things that they're going to be looking for in the cover letter and the resume is, first, there's certain, you know, using our mathematics speak, there's certain things that are necessary but not sufficient. Okay. So like you were saying, the meeting with the Dean's Committee, that's kind of like a necessary but not sufficient thing. If you don't do well, you're not going to get the job. If doing well is not sufficient to get you the job. Okay, there's certain things on your resume that they're going to be looking for that if they're not there, you're probably not going to get an interview. Things that they're going to be looking for is, one, do you have the necessary tools? And what are the necessary tools in today's environment? Well, they're going to want to know, can you work with data? I mean, most companies these days don't have like a separate group that all they do is manage data and then give it to you to go do the modeling. You're going to have the capability to work with data itself. Now, what do you need to do? You don't need to necessarily know the specific tool that company used. You just have to get some experience working with it. Primarily, Excel is like, that's a given. If you don't show that you can use Excel, that's a necessary condition. Using some kind of database, something where you've written SQL, something where you've worked with a relational database. It could be something as easy as Microsoft Access. It doesn't have to be Oracle or SQL Server or something like that, but something that shows you worked with data. One of the big differences, you know, and I'm primarily directing this to people that have gone through school or are now getting out into the quote real world. You know, when you're in school, at least when I took classes way back in the dark ages, you got these problems and they said, given this table of numbers, formulate the problem to solve, you know, this transportation problem or whatever. Well, when you're working in industry, no one gives you the table of numbers. That's part of your job, is to go develop that table. So you need to show that you've got the ability to go and do that work. So that's part of what they're looking for. They're also going to be looking for, and this can be both in your cover letter and in your resume, something that shows that you've got an interest in their company and that you've got some kind of vision as to how you can add value to that company. What would you be doing for them? I'm not talking about specific details, but something that talks about when you're missing, like what your job interests are. It need to be something that's in alignment with what that company does. I mean, if your job interest is, you know, I want to do research in transportation modeling, and you send that resume to a health applications company, they're going to look at that and go like, no, just throw that out, because you stated on your resume that you want to do work for something that's not what we do. So you got to make sure you're in sync and that you've thought about it, and that you've thought about how do you add value. They don't want to hear why you want the job or why you need the job. They want to hear how are you going to add value to the company by having the job. Now that's sometimes, I mean, you wanting the job is somewhat of a necessary condition to be able to add value. If you're kind of lackluster and okay, I'll take it, but it's like last resort, I guess I have to have a job. That's not really going to allow you to add value. But they're much more interested in, they want to hear about, well, I lost my last job 6 months ago, so now I've been out looking for 6 months. They don't want to hear that. How does that add value? I mean, maybe that's a nice conversation during lunch if you're socializing with people, but they want to hear how are you going to add value to the company through what you're doing. So visualize some of that and try to somehow communicate that to the cover letter and the resume, and tailor the cover letter and the resume. So far we got to the point where and also come across as being interested, energetic, professional. I'm sure you guys see this as well. I think probably the equivalent of the resume and the cover letter to the guy showing up in the jeans and the shirt untucked and so on. If you've got spelling mistakes in your resume, if you've got spelling mistakes in your cover letter, if you've got something that's difficult to read, it's the equivalent of that. It's some companies will, like if they come across that way, you're just going to be eliminated. They're going to say, look, if you can't take the attention to detail to get these documents that, this is presenting your first impression, you can't get these documents right. Why do I want to have you come in here and not have the attention to detail in a fast-paced environment where you don't have as much time as you want to take to control, these things. So you've got to spend the time. If English isn't your first language and you're struggling with those things, find somebody that English is their first language and have them proofread it for you. Use Word, and every time on Word, when you see those little lines or hot colored things on there that indicate something doesn't seem right to them, pay attention to what's it talking about in there. There's all sorts of tools to let you avoid those kinds of problems. So tell me back. So let's suppose you found some companies that look like they might, they're hiring people that are doing what you want to do. You sent them your tailored cover letter and your proofread resume that exhibits how you've got the toolkit where you can work with data. And also on your resume, if you have any experience at all doing real world stuff, school projects, internships, you worked before you went back to grad school, anything along those lines, be sure to include that stuff in your cover letter and your resume. People don't want to be the guinea pig. Companies don't want to be the first one that you've ever actually worked on real problems and interacted with people in a business environment. If you've done that before, that's a big plus, because you at least overcome some of those hurdles. So raise those ideas up. So let's suppose you've done that, you've sent these things out, so now you start getting contacted and they want to bring you in for an interview. Okay, so what's the interview in an industry situation? Well, you're typically not going to be asked to give an hour-long or hour-and-a-half-long presentation on your research. You might be asked if you've done any kind of real-world projects to give maybe a 15, 20-minute informed-like presentation on what you did, but rare. That would really be more if you were going into a company where your role was going to be to do research, that they might ask you that. If you're going into a more typical industry job where you're going to be an analyst or an internal consultant, or maybe you're joining a consulting firm or you're interviewing with a consulting firm that's looking for people that are going to go out and work with other companies, they're going to be more interested in maybe you describing that. And what they're looking for is your ability to communicate. And I think that's key during the interview process, is your ability to communicate. They're going to feel that If you've got a degree or about to get a degree from a reputable institution, and you've got the pedigree, they're going to feel that you can handle the technical part of the job just fine. You might have a couple of interviews where some of the senior technical people might be asking you a few technical questions, but that's not what they're looking for. They're going to assume that you can handle that part. What they want to know is, can you communicate with people? Much more so, I think. A lot of schools are different. I taught for 3 years at USC way back when, and in the academic world, the interaction between you and your coworkers is much less than it is in an industry world. Now, I'm not saying that you never. I mean, you're dealing with your colleagues, but in an industry world, it's like a minute-by-minute kind of thing. You're talking to the guy in the cubicle next to you. Your schedule is like, okay, I have a conference call from 8 to 9, and then I've got a meeting from 9 to 10, and then I've got some time where I'm working on the data, crunching with this guy. You're all the time interacting with people, so they're going to want to see how well can you communicate. And they're also going to be trying to get a sense of what would it be like to work with you. I mean, just think about this. If in a workplace, you're typically going to be there from minimum 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. So the people that are interviewing you, they're probably going to be spending more time with you, more face time with you, than they're spending with their kids, maybe with their spouse. I mean, they're spending a whole lot of time with you. And they get to decide in this process whether they want to be spending all that time with you or if they're going to want to spend that time with somebody else. So you want to come across as somebody that's going to be a pleasurable experience, that you're not going to make their life hell. You know, that you're not going to be non-responsive to questions or surly or thinking that, well, you know, I guess I can tolerate working in this place. They don't want that kind of those kinds of people. Now, it may seem like everybody understands that, but I've interviewed a lot of people that at the end was like, I think I was a jerk. I don't want to work with that person. You know, and that would just rule them out. Because again, think about that. What percentage of the time of the day in an industry environment you're spending with these people. So they want to know that they're going to be able to, you guys are going to be able to communicate back and forth. They're going to be able to understand what you're saying. That you're going to be able to translate technical stuff into kind of business speak, and then they're going to want it to be it's a friendly person to work with. So you need to address this. Going back to what Brian said, you need to ask questions, and they need to be the right kinds of questions for the right person you're talking to. If you're typically in an industry situation, they'll bring you in for a day. You'll fly in the night before, unless you're local. Let's assuming that you're traveling. You'll fly in the night before. You'll come in. Typically, someone will pick you up and have breakfast with you. That's kind of a social thing. Typically, that's not kind of a technical one. That person may be going to kind of give you the heads up on what's going to happen during the day. Then you're going to come in and you're probably going to have 4 or 5 45-minute to an hour-long interviews with different people. Some companies have gone to where they're doing panel interviews, where you'll meet with like 3 people for 2 or 3 hours at the same time. Some companies have gone to a lot more structured type interview process where there's like a certain type of questions they want to ask because they're trying to get to some kind of like psychological kinds of things. There's some questions geared to kind of unlock that side of you, so to speak. But you're going to go through those kinds of questions. You're probably going to go to lunch with them. They'll be kind of a more social type atmosphere. And then you'll probably, one of your interviews, depending on the size of the company you're talking to, one of your interviews will be with the HR person, human resource person. This is kind of the equivalent of the dean's office kind of person, although not exactly. But they're going to be talking to you about what the benefits packages are like and what the health insurance program is and what the kind of the job progression, you know, you start at this level and then here's kind of what the next level would be that you would go to. They're going to be, so you want to, the kinds of things like when I say you don't ask the wrong questions, you don't want to be asking questions about salary to the people that are going to would be your coworkers if you got the job. Typically you don't get into that. You get into that with the HR person if you get into it at all. Typically I kind of, wait until you get the job offer to start dealing with salary kinds of questions. It's just a turn off for your coworkers. One, your coworkers, potential coworkers, probably don't have a real good idea what the offer would be. And two, I worked at some companies for a while where the demand was so strong for new hires that new hires were getting offered more money than what existing employees were getting paid. Well, that's kind of a real downer for the existing employee to be having a discussion with somebody that they're interviewing somebody who's probably going to come in and make more money than they are.
So when you do get the offer and you want to talk about salary, do you only talk about it with the HR person?
I would typically talk about it with whoever was name was on the offer letter. That or this most senior person in the organization that is bringing you in. They'll know what the offer is about and so on. But you would not talk about it. In fact, most companies, most like regular publicly traded companies, you're typically not supposed to talk about your salary with your other employees. Even after you're working there, you're not supposed to be talking to each other about what your salaries are.
I heard that some employees ask, what's the range of salary?
Well, I think if they want to open up, if the employer wants to open up the conversation about what are you looking for, that's fine. But you don't want to be the one that's raising. Again, it's a thing about the company wants to be thinking about what you're going to do for them, not, that's not what I can do for you. Well, that's not what the country can do for you, but that's what you can do for your country. Substitute company for country in there, and that's what you want the job thing to be. You don't want. So if they're going to be asking that, that's fine. But if you bring up the topic, now it seems like you're not so interested about what the job position is going to be. You're interested in what it's going to bring for you. So it's kind of a turn off on it. But if they raise it, you should have a feel for what range you're looking for. But you should be as vague about it as you can be. I mean, because you don't know exactly what. If your range is way outside what they've targeted, you don't want to take a guess. So you want to give kind of as wide a range as possible, but you got to be a little bit careful that they don't just offer you at the low end, given if you gave them that range. So you want to be as vague as you can about that.
I'm going to do it. Academic salaries, typically, if an offer is made, it will come from the dean's office, it will say what the salary is, and there's not a huge amount of room for negotiation, I would say, that they give them a good sense of what the salaries are in general across schools. There's some room.
Unless you're going to be using finance.
Exactly. But also, if you only have one offer at that point, you don't have much negotiation sort of leverage. I think if you have more than one offer, it's absolutely fine, and one offer happens to be higher, absolutely, of course you would say, well, the school is offering the X. The more challenging thing, I think, is in academia, a tendency recently to move towards exploding offers. You want you to make a decision in the next week or two. And that makes it more difficult sort of proposition. But I think salary negotiations are probably more difficult, I think, in industry than in academia. If you start one's career.
So just kind of wrap up the process on this questions is again, during that interview process, your goal is to leave those people with the opinion that you're somebody that they want to work with. So that you can make their life easier, you can tackle the problems that they need to have tackled, and that you're going to be fun and energetic and professional to be around, during that considerable amount of time that you're going to be around. And then after those things are done, now the ball's kind of in their court. There's not a lot you get to control anymore. So, you wait and hope that you get a job opportunity. So that's all I've got going on.
Well, Brian, thank you, Bruce. Any questions for these two gentlemen?
You got your slide.
Any questions?
Question here.
So in Forms, we had to make a public profile. We put our whole thing up there, and obviously with academic and industry people side. Do you think it would be unprofessional if someone wrote on there, I'm looking for both an academic and an industry job? Do you think either would look at it and say, well, this person's on?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's not unprofessional. It doesn't mean you want to do it though either. From an academic perspective, and I think I can say this, I did work in industry and then came back to academia. I'm not saying it should be this way, but it is. There's going to be some concern about your passion for research if you are looking at industry jobs. I'm not saying I agree with that view, but it is a view that's out there. And the good news is that we are egotistical enough as academics to assume you want an academic job. And so typically in interviews, that won't be a question that's asked. But whether, I don't, what you put up in a public profile, I don't know. To be honest, we don't have to go look there. We look at the applications that you sent in. So I think you're probably safe enough. And it probably won't get asked. If it's asked, you want an academic job. That's what you say to an academic.
And I would say on the industry side, it's probably not going to eliminate you from consideration, but it would be a red flag that you want something that's research oriented, because very few industry type jobs are really research oriented. So there'd be a lot of questions that would be asked of you about, you know, are you really ready to kind of do work in areas where there's not a lot of research going on. That's the red flag and the questions that would be opened up for you there.
You know, I also point out that don't make career choices because somebody pays you $5,000 more or $10,000. I think that's we hear that all the time, that school X is going to pay me $5,000 or $10,000 more. You don't consider the school S is a huge state income tax, for example. The cost of living is 30% more, but you just compare dollar to dollar and say this person's paying me $10,000 more, and I'm going to go to that school. That's a very, very poor choice. That you got to look at a lot of different things and see what your future is at that school. What kind of college you have, what kind of community you are in. So a lot of those should play a very important role, not just on the $10,000. Trust me, in 20 years, that $10,000 won't mean anything to you. One. Number two, one thing I want to, how truthful should you be in your resume? This is, you think this, be absolutely truthful and accurate on your resume, and you think people don't find out, they do. And when they find out, you ruin your career. You completely ruin your career. And granted, we get 150 applications for a position. We're not going to check every resume and see if they've actually published in management science. But at some point, somebody will find out. We had a situation, it was a number 3 person in the university. And he on his resume, he had a PhD from Tufts University, and he was a Navy SEAL. And we discovered very recently that he didn't have a PhD from Tufts University, and he was never a Navy SEAL. He had 3 little kids. It was, he completely ruined his family. I mean, he was charged misdemeanor, he was convicted. Nobody will hire him anymore, and I don't know how he's going to show his face, because he's been telling his children that, Daddy was a Navy SEAL for the last many years. So it's just not worth it. I think, be very, very truthful on your resume. Accentuate your positive, promote yourself, but in a very truthful and accurate way. Otherwise, it'll come back and haunt you.
My dissertation talk is in a very specific area, but I'm also interested in other areas. How do you have any tips about companies, future employees, about my ability to do
Academia or academia? Yeah, it's a good question in the sense that let's say I'm interviewing someone and their background's like mine and they've done some analytical modeling. And they say that, well, the next 3 years we see them being is an empiricist. I'll be honest, that gives me pause. Because I'm like, well, what makes this person think they have the training to suddenly switch their methodologies completely? So I think you need to be a little bit careful about convincing someone you're going to completely change what you're doing. But I think what you can do is when you're describing what your research is, you describe it in wider brushstrokes. So it doesn't sound as specific and as limiting as it might be. I think it's fine to say you're interested in other areas, but I don't think you want to say, I'm just going to start something afresh. I'm not going to do anything I didn't like I did before. Because it seems a bit odd to faculty when they hear that, I think.
Yeah, I think to back up on, even though I'm more representing the industry side, I think the way you present that is, as opposed to drilling in and doing your whole presentation on the specifics of what your dissertation topic was, you start at a higher level, about more general about what the analytic approach or optimization or whatever it was about, and speak about your specifics as one implementation or one focus of that, but where the overall thing is, that you could take, you're at this broader level, you could focus it someplace else. Now, if you're talking about not having anything to do this, I'm going to go over and do this, that doesn't apply, but do the broad brushstrokes. This is a specific example of how one uses that approach or that algorithm or whatever.
Well, especially when you interview faculty, don't put down other people's work. That's not the time to do it. Right? You will have plenty of time to do that later. A lot of times we talk to candidates and they say, I love modeling work, but I don't like empirical work because I think it's not intellectually very challenging. Those are not the statements that you make when you look for a job.
Or vice versa.
Or vice versa, absolutely, vice versa. That's not the time to do it, and I hope we never do that. I mean, I think, we have some of that in our profession. I don't believe it's very healthy for us, but people do that all the time. They come for a faculty position, they put down, you talk to finance people, investments people, they put down corporate finance people, and vice versa. You got management there, you have micro and macro people. I think that's not the time to talk about those things. Because I think invariably that is a very bad signal that you're not going to be a great colleague. Yeah.
Slightly related note to that, if you give a job talk, there's always a literature survey part of the job talk. If you know someone at the school has done work that's important in that area, make sure the name's up in the literature survey. I mean, you might give a slight different literature survey based on the schools you go to, but you're not going to go to 50 different schools. So it's a little bit of effort and work you can do. If you go and give a talk in a place and everyone knows that person X has done a lot of work in this field and their name's not up there when you're surveying the field, it just looks as if you hadn't thought about that aspect. And so you get, it speaks to preparation and thinking things through it. So.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. And for academics, is it true that you don't want to apply to a place where you'll probably not do a paper, if you apply to a place where someone does exactly the same thing you do? Or like 2 or 3 people are sort of already in your area?
I've never heard that, to be honest. In my view, not
that's
true.
something my advisor told me. He said, you don't want to go, send your application to a place where someone's doing exactly the same thing you're doing, because then they're going to say, well, we don't,
Let them make that determination. You don't have to decide for them whether they hire you or not, in a sense. So I think as long as you can imagine you'd be happy to go there, then you apply. If the only place you apply to a place you would not go to under any circumstances, then you don't apply, don't waste their time, don't waste your time.
Yeah, I think, again, Paul and I came from SMU in the 80s, when there were probably four
90s.
Slip of the tongue. And there were probably 4 full-time faculty in our department, 3 of which did network optimization work. So there's plenty of examples of there, and there's some discussion that you need to have more than one person doing work in a specific field so they can have someone to bounce ideas off. If no one in your department does work at all related to what you do, then it's very difficult to brainstorm and to make progress and to be able to critique each other's work. So you don't have to go to the level that we had it there, but I think it.
I mean, your advisor's right. Some schools might not want to hire a 4th person, but you don't know that. Some schools will want to hire someone like it, and because you don't know, then you might as well apply. That's my personal view.
Somebody else, yes.
For industry job, it actually that people don't pay attention to their public.
I'm sorry?
Pay attention to their public.
In industry jobs, do people not pay attention to your publication record? Well, unless it can be a positive. If you've published stuff that's directly applicable to the position, for example, if you're applying to, my background's in freight transportation, so I use examples. If you're applying to a position at a railroad and your dissertation work was on a locomotive scheduling problem, yeah, they'll pay attention to it. But if it's not something that's directly applicable to the stuff, it's probably not going to do you much good.
Say that I have some working paper, which might not be published by the time I graduate. Can I continue to work on the working paper and actually by because the company encourages that.
Does the company, so the question was, if you've got like a working paper that you're trying to get published, does the company encourage, depends on the company, but most companies, you can do that on your own time, but they're probably not going to want you to spend your normal working time trying to get your papers published. Because again, how's that adding value to them?
I had this exact issue that I was in the industry afterwards. It took me a lot longer to publish the working papers because I couldn't do that in the company time. And so I had to find time on weekends or nights to try and move it along, and also it just took a lot longer.
Any more questions? Yes.
For industry, like the resume, how long should the resume be for industry? I know for everything, you talk about CVs that are 5, 6, 7 pages.
I'd say no more than 2 pages.
Okay.
I mean, typically, if you can, if you're really fresh coming out of school, I'd say try to do it in 1 page. If you've got some work experience and you really would like to be able to include that in there, 2 pages. If you're sending it non-electronically, I'd probably print it front and back, so that they just have 1 piece of paper that they got to carry around. If you're sending electronically, then it's up to them how to print it out. But I would not go more than 2 pages.
Yes.
Is it for references? I would just put typically references provided upon request. If it gets to the point where they want references, they'll ask them for you, but you don't need to include that on your resume or your cover letter. You need to line some up, and you need to check with them beforehand to see what they're going to say about you. I mean, there have been people, I've had people that have worked for me that were reasonably good employees but weren't stellar. And they've asked me if I'll serve as a reference for them. And I've said, yes, but here's what I'm going to say. And you want to be sure if you're listing somebody as a reference, what they're going to, they're going to give you a positive. This is one thing you get to control. So if you control them, make sure they're going to communicate what you want communicated.
For industry job, people can in what sections of the resume?
I'm sorry? What sections of the resume? There's plenty of online things where you can go look up how to construct a resume. They're going to want to know your education background. They're going to want to know what work experience you have, if any, and what if you know how to program. They're going to want to know like what kind of programming languages or software packages. But you should go online. There's plenty of places there where you can find what a resume should look like, and you'll find plenty of things of what not to do on your resume.
Well, Brian, Bruce, thank you so much for taking your time this morning, and I'll give you a round of applause for it. In closing, I know many of you in the job market. Stay upbeat, stay positive. You will find a job. You will live happily after, like we have in academia and industry. You will hear a lot of no's, but don't let that get you down. So good luck to you, and thanks for joining us today this morning. Thank you.
I love it, actually. It's good.